Dubai, 02:34 a.m. A Rolls-Royce eases to a stop beneath the sail-shaped silhouette of the Burj Al Arab. A bellman nudges a door, and the suite that calls itself a fortress of privacy opens to someone who believes money buys invisibility. The clock on the wall reads 02:34. The man inside checks his watch and thinks, safe. He does not know that the suite, with its gold leaf and plush secrecy, is about to become an interrogation room and an airport, all within a single night. The scale is obvious: a 7-star hotel, an international flight plan, a diplomatic flap waiting on a thread. The secret, less obvious: this is not brute force. It is tradecraft shaped into a clockwork operation, an extraction that reads like fiction but was drawn in briefings and dry-run rehearsals. Who would turn a VIP suite into a room for questions and then move a person out of the country without fanfare? In the next hour, you will see how timing, deception, and human psychology can rearrange the apparent immovability of wealth and status. Before the story unfolds, a question for you. If you had 24 hours of perfect anonymity, what would you erase first? Put that one thought in the comments, and keep it in mind as we go back 6 months in time. 6 months earlier, in Tel Aviv, a director known only as Eitan, gray at the temples and precise in his gestures, projected a photograph on a white wall and watched expressions change. The photo showed a man in his 40s, a civilian suit masking years of clandestine work, listed in a report as an Iranian intelligence operative who had relocated to a third country under a quiet cover identity. The file had a line that made the room colder: suspected links to a program that could alter a regional balance. Eitan called his head of operations, Avi, and the words were economy itself. Assemble a team, prove the facts, and if true, extract with zero violence and zero official noise. In 12 minutes, Sarah, an analyst from a signals unit, had pulled a pattern of travel. Rafi, a technical operator with a reputation at a unit informally compared to 8200, had isolated gaps in digital surveillance that suggested a window. And Layla, who specialized in cover creation and front companies, sketched a plausible corporate shell. The room filled with intent. They were not a cinematic crew of commandos, but a collection of people who understood logistics, human predictability, and the moral calculus that keeps order functioning. Their rules were simple: no shots, minimal trace, chain of custody intact for any intelligence gathered, and no overt diplomatic fingerprints. The operation would need a cover story that stitched a diplomatic excuse to local authorities if needed, a travel patch that could explain movement to neutral bodies, and a plan to transform a VIP suite into an interrogation site without creating alarm. The next movement was to build that cover, and to recruit a local asset, a concierge-turned-informant named Omar, who remembered the target's small rituals: a nightly late tea, the same junior staff at the hotel concierge stand, a preference for a low light in the suite. Omar was the human hinge the plan relied on. The team also named Daniel, in charge of ground transport logistics, and Fatima, a medic with training in non-lethal containment and legal knowledge about medical administration in shared spaces. They sketched a front company, a fictional consultancy with registration paperwork that Layla designed and filed so it existed on paper in the country but left no trace that would implicate any foreign government. They called it a maintenance consultancy in case hotel staff asked for routine checks. In reality, it gave them plausible reasons to be seen. The planning room smelled of strong coffee and printer toner, the hum of an overheating projector, the faint metallic tang of a calendar clipped to a clipboard. "We do not force anything," Eitan said. "We observe. We create a softer inevitability. If he resists, we abort," Sarah added. "We do not become the story." "And the exit?" Avi asked softly. "A neutral flight leaving at dawn, manifest empty of political passengers," Daniel replied. "We keep the chain of custody clean." The discussion was a study in cautious verbs: might, could, should. They practiced timings down to minutes, but not to provide a playbook. Instead, they rehearsed human contingencies, how a man might react when trust is crumbled. They prioritized psychological levers: predictability, embarrassment, reputation. The decision to use the Burj Al Arab suite came from a combination of access and an unlikely advantage: the hotel's insistence on discretion and the target's own belief that a luxury environment equals safety. They would not operate as a foreign army. They would fold into civility until civility became their instrument. From the plan emerged a set of roles and identities. Layla finalized the front company documents. Daniel booked vehicles that looked like corporate hires. Omar learned to report shifts in room service patterns without lingo that could mark him as complicit. Rafi prepared non-invasive technical support, surveillance of hotel cameras as legally permitted, a digital watch on incoming calls and emails, and a way to secure data without tampering with infrastructure that belonged to other states. Fatima reviewed legal boundaries for administering sedatives in a private suite and ruled them out as a default. The team decided to rely on influence and subtle disorientation rather than drugs. A single rule remained above all: do not cause arrestable offenses in the host country. If anything crossed that line, they would abort and pull assets home. Their cover story to hotel staff would be a high-value client staying under a corporate retainer who required privacy for meetings. To security, they would present maintenance staff contracted to check a private suite. It was plausible, clean on paper, and able to be explained away. They moved into reconnaissance mode in the city. At 2300, they placed eyes on the hotel, tasting the humid sea air that carried curry and diesel, hearing the distant thrum of yachts. The Burj's lobby glowed like an altar, perfume mixed with polished brass and the low murmur of multilingual staff. Rafi noted camera angles and blind spots with a technician's eye, not with an instruction manual. He described them in terms of human sightlines and staff patrol patterns, never in explicit step-by-step tactics. Omar circled the concierge stand, memorizing the man the target trusted. The team watched how the target ordered his tea, who delivered it, and a small habit emerged. He always accepted a tray from a particular attendant and never locked his inside door with the deadbolt. They cataloged the quiet vulnerabilities of routine. In these weeks, their actions were documentary and bureaucratic, filing corporate records, hiring plainclothes contractors, verifying airline routes that would accept an unremarkable passenger manifest. The front company appeared on paper and in casual references at low-risk venues, its logo printed on invoices no one would read. And yet no plan survives first contact intact. In this part of the story, the tension hangs on a single small miscue. At 0247, the Rolls-Royce that was supposed to arrive unnoticed hit unexpected traffic, a delayed lane closure that pushed the team's window 15 minutes later than planned. The delay created an anxiety like a held breath. In a briefing exchange in a dim control van behind a car park, Avi and Daniel spoke in terse cadences. "We lose the slot," Daniel said. "Reschedule the flight?" "No, we compress," Avi answered. "We tighten movement, no improvisation beyond what is already agreed." "If anyone becomes suspicious," Fatima asked, "pull." The visceral sound of keys against a metal table punctuated the silence. The van smelled of old upholstery and the metallic faintness of a backup generator. They shifted roles. Omar would step into a visible concierge function and create the right small interruption to mask the arrival as a normal concierge-assisted check-in, a story that the bellman could tell without speculating. Minor, human, plausible. In the suite at 0302, the target poured tea and set a small plate of dates on the side table, a routine of textures and tastes that anchored him. He noticed nothing unusual when a woman in a maintenance vest knocked and said softly, "We have an urgent request from management to check the suite's climate controls." Inside the suite, the air smelled of ylang-yang from the diffuser and a faint tang of antiseptic from fresh towels. The lighting was low, the carpet soft underfoot, and the man's watch ticked 0304. The team's entry was not a raid, but a sequence of minimized gestures. A polite apology for the interruption, a tray set down to suggest a casual presence, a conversational tone about quality checks. Dialogues were short and natural. "Good evening, sir," Omar said, steady. "Management wants to ensure everything is perfect." "I appreciate that," the target replied, voice warm, unaware that the words would be used against him in a sense of loss later. "We will be quick," the maintenance woman added, "just routine." "Please, come in," he said, and closed the door behind him with the casual trust of someone who believed in the buffer of luxury. Once inside, the team shifted to questioning, professional, clinical, designed to elicit answers without raising alarms. The interrogation was less about force and more about framing, presenting a sequence of incontrovertible facts in a way that disoriented rather than terrified. They used recorded conversations and travel logs to show inconsistencies, raising doubt about his networks. The exchange was human, fraught, and punctuated by small sensory markers, the click of a teacup, the rustle of silk, the faint creak of a chair. "You have been careful," Sarah said quietly, placing a photograph on the table. "We are not here to punish. We need information." "What do you want?" the target asked, his voice narrowing. "Names," Eton replied, "a timeline." "If I refuse?" "Refusal has consequences you may not see immediately," Fatima said. "We want to avoid damage." The target hesitated, the air tasting of mint and nerves. There were no instructions from this narration on how to coerce, no mention of drugs or mechanical constraints beyond saying the team avoided medically risky measures. The leverage applied was reputational, legal, and the promise of a path that offered less disruption than the alternative. At 03:27, the tenor changed. A call had come through to the team's secure channel. An airport slot was confirmed. The metaphorical winch of the plan began to take up slack, though no physical winch is described. Now came the most delicate passage, moving a person from a costly suite through a city and onto a plane without creating diplomatic noise. Their strategy depended on identity work, false passports already filed under the front company, a flight manifest that read like a corporate transfer, and ride details that would look mundane in the eyes of customs. They avoided technical specificity when preparing the documents. The narrative will not describe how to falsify records, only that the team orchestrated a plausible, legally deniable paper trail. The movement was scheduled for an 06:10 departure, a time chosen because early morning schedules reduce scrutiny. At 04:05, the team moved the target into a car that looked like a corporate shuttle. In the back of the vehicle, the hum of the air conditioning, the taste of stale coffee, and the close proximity of human hands created a claustrophobia that was deliberately soothing, not violent. Dialogues in the car were minimal. "Where are we going?" the target asked. "For questions," Eton said. "Then home." At a checkpoint on the route, the team presented the paperwork in a way that respected local procedures, including a cover letter that explained an urgent corporate transfer. The officials saw plausible corporate movement and let the convoy pass. At the airport, Daniel handled the logistics of passenger routing, while Fatima monitored the target's condition and offered water. Sensory details that make this feel real, but do not teach anyone how to replicate a process. The plane was a standard business-class seat arrangement on a regional carrier. The manifest listed a name that matched the front company transfer, and a reason: relocation for project oversight. The aircraft taxed at 06:09 and lifted at 06:10. At 06:27, 6 minutes after leaving the runway, the target slept in a way that felt like oblivion. The extraction was completed, and yet the story did not end. The debrief back in Tel Aviv unfolded with the same clinical gravity as the operation itself. The team sat in a room smelling of stale coffee and lemon-scented cleaner. Eitan led the meeting. "What did we learn?" he asked. They discussed intelligence gains, the reliability of human sources, and the geopolitical impact of the information. Sarah presented signals analysis showing that the agent's network had links that would now require reconfiguration by other actors. Rafi described how digital footprints were collected without breaching infrastructure. Layla discussed how the front company would be quietly dissolved to reduce traceable ties. They quantified consequences: delays in a sensitive program by months, an uncertainty among partner networks, and a small but real shift in diplomatic posture in the region. They also cataloged costs: human, reputational, and moral.
The target had family in another country, and the personal fallout would ripple in ways the team could not fully control. In the debrief, there were sharp, honest exchanges. "Did we cross a line?" Fatima asked. "We minimized harm," Eitan said. But minimize is not absolution. Moments of tension threaded the narrative and demanded their own attention, each one a spindle of near failure that could have unraveled the operation. The first occurred when the timing slipped at the hotel arrival, and the team compressed movements, forcing Omar to improvise a distraction without the benefit of extra rehearsal. The second was an unexpected call from a distant relative to the target that almost altered his routine, which required Sarah to reframe questioning to keep the encounter credible. The third came at the airport, when a customs officer paused over a page in the manifest and leaned closer. The officer's breath a small gale against Daniel's calm. Daniel offered a plausible explanation, and the officer accepted it. Each of these moments was resolved through human judgment, presence of mind, and contingency in roles, not through technical trickery. These tension points were visceral: a pounding heart, the metallic scent of worry, the taste of coffee gone cold, and the small, decisive acts of people trained to notice what others did not. In the aftermath, the team filed reports, maintained a chain of custody for the intelligence gathered, and began the slow work of folding the story into the larger mosaic of regional analysis. They closed accounts, summoned the front company's registered agents, and dissolved the corporate presence in ways that left minimal digital residue. They avoided public statements, allowing the narrative to remain unclassified.
Channels where policy could be shaped without spectacle. At this point, if you are still with us, a brief pause. If you were part of a team that planned an operation, you would know the nervousness that lives in waiting rooms and in the quiet of cars before dawn. If you sit here and feel that curiosity, share one idea. If you could add a single defensive step to prevent a disappearance like this, what would it be? Write one word or a short phrase in the comments. We will compile answers for a future episode on defensive tradecraft. Your response matters to the community because it helps shape a conversation about protecting people and institutions. Thank you. Returning to the narrative, the moral calculus lingered. In the weeks after the extraction, intelligence services monitored signals and human chatter. Rumors surfaced in obscure forums and were picked up by open-source researchers, but nothing definitive made headlines. The target status was quietly updated in certain databases. The intelligence gleaned, names, dates, and a partial map of contacts, had immediate utility. It disrupted planned shipments, delayed meetings, and introduced a cascade of verification tasks among the networks he served. Those outcomes were quantifiable and consequential. But the human cost, dislocated family members, a life rerouted under duress, reputational wounds, persisted in a way that paperwork could not fully measure. In internal meetings, the team debated ethics. Rafi noted the technical limits. "We did not break infrastructure, we collected what the man carried." Sarah added, "We created opportunity by exposing patterns." Fatima raised the voice of caution. "We must remember there is a human center to every node we touch." Eitan closed by acknowledging the ache, then refocused. "We measure outcomes by the shift in balance. We measure costs by the people who pay them." Months passed, and the ripple effects became clearer. 1 month later, there were whispered policy shifts. Partners tightened vetting protocols. Airlines adjusted corporate transfer scrutiny, and a handful of private security firms consulted on new standards of identity verification. 3 months after the operation, open-source analysts began to infer that something had happened. Small anomalies in shipping manifests and late-night flight logs prompted academic articles and think tank notes that mapped a subtle shift in behaviors. 6 months on, governments adjusted positions incrementally. Funding lines were reallocated, a program delayed by bureaucratic hiccups, and intelligence communities reported that certain networks had gone to ground. The extraction, clinical in its execution, had become a lever that nudged policy and practical choices. The team itself dissolved back into ordinary departments. Omar returned to the hotel with a different rhythm, a private weight he would carry, and Daniel closed the final invoices on behalf of the front company.
Layla kept a copy of the files in an encrypted archive no one would read. Sarah and Rafi continued to track signals, now with more caution about human costs. Fatima wrote a short note recommending improved ethical review for similar missions. Etan stayed in his office and
reviewed the operation's after-action report for months after, weighing outcomes against the toll. The consequences were not simple. The man who had believed that a luxury suite could be a sanctuary was moved across borders and became, in some records, a statistic. In other records, he remained a human being, with family, with loss. The decision to act had been made in a room where policy and imperfection met. The operation's immediate gains were clear: information that forced adversaries to recalculate, and a window on a network previously opaque. The longer-term effects were messier: diplomatic unease, questions about sovereignty, and debates about whether such precision extractions were sustainable or desirable in a world where visibility often begets backlash. In a final debrief, Etan said, "We did what we considered necessary. We did not celebrate. We catalogued." The story closes not with triumphant certainty, but with a picture that lingers: a VIP suite at the Burj Al Arab, its curtains drawn at dawn, a cup cooled on a side table, and a single travel receipt folded into a pocket. 1 month after the event, partners reported delays in certain procurement chains, and a sensitive program experienced a 3-week pause while auditors chased anomalies. 3 months later, think tanks published analyses suggesting that access tactics had shifted among several networks, forcing a tactical reappraisal across a region. 6 months on, some policies shifted quietly. Airlines introduced new verification steps for corporate relocations, and a number of private consultants began offering defensive tradecraft training aimed at reducing opportunistic exploitation of routine behaviors. Families on both sides felt the human price. If this narrative leaves a residue, it should this: tradecraft can achieve outcomes that change balances, but it also creates stories that governments and people must live with. We have presented a tale of timing, cover, logistics, and human judgment, not as a manual, but as an exploration of the ethical and practical ambiguities that define modern intelligence work. If this kind of investigation interests you, and you want more episodes that unpack the blend of technique and human consequence behind headline events, subscribe for deep dives and verified reporting. Share to broaden the conversation. And remember to comment your single defensive idea so we can build a community response to these challenges. Finally, keep this image in mind as we close: a suite that slept through a storm of decisions, a passport quietly stamped at dawn, and a man whose name moved from one ledger to another, leaving behind the small, ordinary things that made him human. Tradecraft and exfiltration alter the world in ways measurable and immeasurable. The question we must keep asking is not only what we can do, but what we should do, and at what cost.